Welcome to the Cybersecurity Simplified podcast, where we take the mystery out of today's top security threats and solutions. What's next for network security? Who better to ask than the expert who's helped define the space since 1985? Our next guest started his career developing security solutions at Bell Labs and later became the first CISO for AT&T and the second person in history to carry the title. Along the way, he's consulted for presidential administrations and served as a professor of cybersecurity at Johns Hopkins, Stevens Institute of Technology, and NYU. Today, he's CEO of Tag Cyber, which provides cybersecurity research and advisory as a service. Stay tuned as we talk all things network security with the OG CISO, Ed Amoroso. Hi, everyone. I'm your co-host, Susanna Song.
And I'm co-host Dave Barton.
Hey, Dave. We've got quite a guest today on the Cybersecurity Podcast. Welcome,
we've
Ed.
had, welcome, Ed. We've had some really interesting guests, and Ed, when we thought about bringing you on, I'm like, this is the guy we need to talk to because he's got some interesting perspectives, and he's been doing this longer than I have. So, Ed, welcome. We're excited to have you join us.
Thanks for including me. Looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, so Ed, you are truly the OG. I've met so many CISOs over the past several years, being in marketing for a cybersecurity company. But to have you in the room with us, take us back to how it all started for you. I am so curious. To be the second in line.
And before you do, Ed, I learned a stat about you today I didn't know, which was that you're the second CISO with that title anywhere. Who was first?
I was Steve Katz was first.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, kind of a serendipitous thing. Going back before that, I was pretty lucky. My dad was a computer scientist, and he was early 60s doing a PhD in electrical engineering at Penn. And they came to him and said, "You're doing this work. We want to call it computer science. We're creating a new department. Could we call your PhD that?" And my dad famously said, "If you have to call yourself a science, you're not one," meaning
right.
Computer science was. But he did it, and he was, very, very, very early PhD in CS. So I grew up with a dad who knew this industry. I was a physics major undergrad, but I loved computing. And when I came out, I wanted to go to grad school. My dad said, "Hey, computer security," this was in 1983. He goes, "Wow, security is going to be big." He said, "That's something you should focus on." I said, "All right, Dad." And so that's like a major hint from somebody.
Wow, that is huge.
Yeah, so I didn't know one thing from another, but it sounded right. I trusted my dad. So 40 years later, 4 decades later, I'm still doing it. But it wasn't because I had some insights, because I had major, major advantage with a dad who gave me a big hint.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So
I tried that with my kids. Go ahead, Susanna.
Sorry for interjecting here, but we've got a lot of millennials and Gen Zers who are listening. So what 40 years ago were you dealing with in terms of cybersecurity? What kind of attacks were happening to the network then?
It was a fair fight. It was hackers who were pretty much benign, just hackers along those same lines of mischievousness of somebody being young, doing graffiti and hacking websites. It wasn't a nation state. And it was people like Dave, myself, and others who were on the other side, just still like messing around with networks and computers. It just, we were more on the side of trying to stop the attacks. So it's very fair. And you didn't feel like you were doing something to like protect children's hospitals. You were just trying to explore what was possible, and it felt very reasonable, not asymmetric the way it is now, like a nation state against a small teams. Nothing like that at all. So it gave us the opportunity to learn our craft without the encumbrance of all the consequence in case you do it wrong. So if you got hacked, you could sit down and really go through it and try and figure out, what did we do wrong? What could we learn from that? You don't have that kind of luxury anymore. Now you get hacked and you're probably in front of a congressional committee the next week. So, so it's a little
or your stock takes a beating, or your share price. I mean, all of those reputation, brand, none of that mattered back when we were doing this when we started.
Yeah.
And now it's all, it impacts markets, entire markets. When we were, one of the stories I tell Susanna, when Ed and I were at AT&T, there were attacks in other parts of telecom, and all the stock took a beating. And it wasn't AT&T. It was someone else got hammered, but we were guilty by association. Didn't have that 40 years ago.
Yeah, that is true. And you wouldn't feel so bad if you were dealing with an adversary that was roughly equivalent to what you were doing. Because, a company like a bank will set up an IT security team. They'll hire a manager, they'll hire some staff, they'll hire people. Maybe they're 300-400 people. So they put some real time and effort into it.
Right.
But you're up against a nation state military. How are you supposed to stop them? I don't care what kind of data sharing or support or whatever. It's not a fair fight. Now, maybe you can, do an acceptable job keeping things going, but it's just not fair. So if I had to describe it in one word, I'd say asymmetric. That's the situation we have right now. The offense has it not only easier, but they're bigger. Like here's an example. I teach over at NYU, and we do like these hackathons and also demonstrations of offense versus defense. It's kind of fun. You set it up and the kids do these attacks. We set them up with a range platform and try and you've seen that.
Yep.
So a typical sort of thing, you'll have a big room while students are in. It might be like 30 kids all sitting there, all got the t-shirt on, it's very fun. There's pizza,
right,
orders, and it's real nice. It's fun, right? So then somebody will say, like a Wired magazine or somebody will go, "Oh, where's the offense?" And we go, "Oh, we'll show you the offense." And everybody like walks down the hall. You look in a window and there's like Bob sitting there. So it's like 1 on 30. It's like
right.
Considered a fair scrimmage. And nobody ever says anything. It just, you don't take a moment to think, if we were doing a pickup basketball game and it was 5-on-1, well, if it's LeBron against the 5, then okay. But
right.
5-on-1 you would normally think is not fair, but the 1 has the advantage. So how about if it's 1,000 offense against 500 defense, plus the asymmetry of 1 on 30 is even? That gives you an idea of the problem that enterprise security teams have now. That's why everybody goes, "Oh my gosh, how are we getting hacked?" And I go, "How are we not?
How are we not? That's right.
That's just not fair."
You're right. Right. I use this phrase a lot, Ed. The bad guys have to be right once.
Yeah, it's
the
true.
Good guys have to be right 100 times.
Yeah,
100%. And that's a little bit of pressure.
Here's the thing you guys can do on your podcast. You got a lot of young people listening. If you can encourage them to divert some of their creative energy away from finding new hacks to finding new defenses, we already know that if you put a little time and attention into pretty much anything, you're going to find vulnerabilities. That's no longer really a good use, in my opinion. This is just me speaking, of the creative energy. I'd rather you spend some time thinking about how we can avoid problems than how we can prove that they're there. So you almost, the way you do it now when you're doing enterprise security is you start with the assumption that pretty much everywhere you've got leaks and you've got ways in. So now what do? So it's like, okay, let's see, if I've got a porous perimeter, I know that's true, then maybe I scatter my resources, I break them up. Like there are things you can do in the presence of vulnerabilities. That's where young people should be making their mark now, as opposed to, like, you go to DEF CON, you go to, and it's all about, hey, look, I found a new iPhone hack, and you want to go, well, it's clever that you did that, but I wish you'd have put the time into something else, because we already know there's, what did we really learn from that? So that would be my advice.
Ed, in the last 4 decades, what is the biggest surprise that you've seen in terms of the threat landscape that even 40 years ago, you would never have imagined that we would be here in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. Like, a lot of it doesn't surprise me. One place where I wish we were doing a little bit better would be government. And I have great respect for people. My dad was 35 years in government, and Dave knows. Anybody in government ask for help, it's always yes. Even if it's whatever, free advice, sitting on groups, I always do it. But the challenge we have that I've seen emerge is that there's this dogma that has popped out in most governments that I think is kind of wrong. And I'll list it's 3 things that bother me. And it doesn't come from a bad place in government. These people are really trying hard to fix it. But here's number 1. Number 1 is a belief that if you follow a compliance framework, you'll be secure. So that is pervasive at the state level, at the government level. You name a state and they go, oh, we're going to this to the table. These are our framework requirements, and now we're going to be secure. You want to say, listen, been there, done that. We got 30 frameworks, and you can even make fun of it by saying, like, if you're the, your football team, and I say, this is the framework you have to use to play defense. Well, the offense gets to see that too.
That's right. Yeah.
It's like, is that really the way you want to do defense? Or should defense be more unpredictable and creative and you have no idea what I'm doing? And I don't know. I'm just saying, so that's dogma 1, this idea that if you do compliance, you're secure. We all know that's wrong. Number 2 is a little more subtle. It's this idea that I think a lot of government groups believe that in industry, we kind of really do know how to do security. We just don't. We're kind of lazy. So we have to be regulated, fined, cajoled, pushed to do it. If we really push you, you'll do it. The problem is, man, we really don't know how to do. We need help, not ready.
That's right.
If we really did know how to do it and we just weren't, then definitely should be fining us. The problem is, I think they miss the fact that, man, we're really trying hard. It's not negligence on the part of banks where they go, look, what does JP Morgan Chase claim to spend, like close to $1 billion in cybersecurity? I mean, it's not like they're just blowing it off. So that's dogma number 2, that I feel like we need help as opposed to that. And then the third dogma that I think is related is this idea that if we all just did these 2 or 3 simple things, the cyber problem would go away. It's just people, like picking bad passwords, doing these couple of like we just get everybody doing MFA and everybody just doing these 8 things. Be careful what you click on, no more cyber problem. The thing that misses is that they're correct that when the barn doors are open, Dave and I will walk in the front door because you left the door open.
Sure.
Duh. Right. But if windows are open and cracks and stuff, I'm not going to put a ladder and climb in the window if the barn door's open.
Right.
But if you close the barn door, then I'm just going to get the ladder and climb the window. It's a little bit more work, but it doesn't stop the problem. So I think they miss the idea that the reason most of the attacks use these basic things is because attackers are not dumb. They're going to take the easy thing.
Right.
But it's not
easy.
like
that's right. Low hanging fruit.
The problem, it just, yes, if you say, let's make it harder for them. Yes, I'd rather make you climb a ladder and climb in the window to break in my house. But this idea that, well, if we could just close the barn door, we have no problem is so wrong. So those 3 things from government have bothered me for years because I think it simplifies, and members of Congress definitely, that you'll go sit in some congressman's office or congresswoman's office, and they're on the rocking chair and they're petting their dog, and they say, oh, you know what, Ed, what my team tells me, if we just get everybody, not clicking on all this darn stuff on the internet, we wouldn't have this problem anymore. And you want to say, well, I don't want them just clicking on stuff in the ear. You're right about that. That'll reduce risk.
Right.
That solves the problem. So that in the last 40 years, that's been the most frustrating. These are well-meaning people. People who go to government typically do so because they care about service, and they usually have a lot of purpose behind it. But I think they get it wrong. And when you point it out, it can be a bumpy conversation because it looks like you're calling somebody's baby ugly. And I'm not doing that. I just want everybody to get better at this.
Sure.
Tricky. Good luck to us, right?
Yeah. David,
right.
Do you have a question? Or else I have so many questions for Ed. So I want to be fair.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So let's look now forward to the next decade, what trends, I mean, maybe the next year, and we know cybersecurity is evolving very quickly. We also know it's not if, but when. So what are the biggest takeaways that every business, small to the large enterprise, should be focused on? Is it resilience? Is it, I know Dave loves to preach, the mean time to dwell and mean time to detection, to lower that time, right? And to respond quickly. What are some trends that people should be focusing on?
Well, let me give you a macro trend, then we can decide if this is of any darn use to anybody, but I see it. If you go back to the first generation, it was manual offense against manual defense. It was somebody at keyboard typing a hack and somebody at the other end looking at logs and trying to stop. Now we have a hybrid of manual and a lot of automation. So it's a combination of automated tools for offense and a combination of automated manual tools for defense. With AI, I would say in the next 10 to 15 years, it's going to be my AI against your AI, automation against automation, and we'll sit behind the glass wall and watch this AI wins. Now, that's bizarre. And I always joke that that's like the old Letterman thing where you had a humidifier and a dehumidifier fighting it out in the same room.
Right,
It's going to be something like that. Like if but here's what, it has a nice impact. It fixes the symmetry problem.
It does.
Suddenly, everybody has like, you know how if you're a little teeny accounting firm, or if you're EY, you have the same Microsoft Office tools, right? It's the same.
You do.
We're on Zoom right now. If we're the cabinet level discussion, or if we're 3 kids doing their 6th grade homework, you're on the same Zoom tool. So once offensive and defensive AI for cyber are the great leveler, it could be that it's the end of cybersecurity as we know it. Cybersecurity becomes a new thing then. It'll be injecting bias. It'll be somehow influencing or changing the AI. It'll be injecting things that cause your AI to not work right. But if it's automation against automation, great leveler, and it could be that cybersecurity goes the way of physical bank robberies, where we don't worry about it so much. We worry about other stuff. But this thing we do called cyber, in the next 10 years could actually go away, which is a weird concept if you're in the investment community, because investors are still pouring billions of dollars, trillions of dollars into new startups. And you wonder, does the music end at some point? I think what happens is the automation becomes spectacularly valuable, and anything that even hints at non-scalable manual activity will go the way of the buggy whip. You can't do anything in human or manual time in a few years. It has to all be autonomous, AI powered, intelligent, and fast. So that's probably where things are going in the next few years.
It's interesting you brought that topic up, Ed. When 60 Minutes about 6 years ago did a story on IBM Watson and where it was going, right? I don't know if you remember that. And I was talking with some of my fellow cyber folks, and I said, look, what's going to happen in our future is good guy Watson versus bad guy Watson.
Yeah.
We're just going to sit and watch. And that break glass button, it's going to say turn off internet or something, right? Because our ability to affect change when AI is operating at the speed that it does, we just have to hope our programmers are better at building the defensive pieces and maybe sprinkle in some offensive pieces than the bad guys.
Well, we'll have just as much offense as everybody else.
Right.
It'll be, like I said, it'll be symmetric. Every nation will be in more or less the same situation. So as long as the defense works, you should be good. Look, you can do some really clever things. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're worried about it. It's a terrible analogy, but I'll use it because it's very illustrative, very visual. If you have a big building and you don't want somebody to truck bomb it, there's 2 options. One is I can build a big gate in front of it with guards. And if I see trucks coming, I do the best I can to stop them. That may not work. The other is, how about I disassemble the building into a bunch of bricks and scatter them all over the place? Now you drive up and you go,
Where's my target? All right.
What do I aim at?
Right.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's an example of an algorithm that when you think about it, you go, wow, that's really clever. Now you go, how do you have a building with separate bricks? You can't, but in cyber, you totally can. They're called workloads and containers and that.
Right.
You scatter it all over the place. Suddenly you go, wow, that's a really clever concept. Maybe there's ways to be intelligent here and make cyber attacks more difficult by being more elusive. That's not like buying another vendor tool. That's using your intelligence in a way to think things through. So it's not all bleak. There's a lot that can come. It's just we have to manage it, right? And as I said earlier, government should be leading this. The problem is that when you talk to government, it's all this conventional stuff, compliance, follow these 3 things, and then, go convict the CISO and throw them in jail because you didn't report something.
Makes perfect sense, yeah.
Not the way I would do it.
Well, and I told a story this morning. I spoke at a panel here in Florida, and I said there's legislation that says, like, for example, in the Colonial Pipeline event, it wasn't Colonial's fault, it was Microsoft's. And the White House wants to shift that liability from the user to the manufacturer. So it's not the person behind the trigger, it's the gun itself. And that's an interesting conversation too for us in this space. So regulatory pressure and legislation that's coming is going to help define what it looks like in 10 years. And I'm not sure I like where it's at.
Well, lawyers know how to point legislation toward whoever has the money. So
for sure,
wise to do something. If the end goal is that there be big payoffs when there are attacks, then you definitely go after Amazon, Microsoft. These are trillion-dollar companies, so they can pay. We live in that kind of a society. For me, I almost think that in the long run, these things will be distractions, because I don't think ultimately that's going to be the way this goes. I really do think that automation is going to make much of this move. Like if you said in 1930, we were arguing about who do you blame for bank robberies? The guy who builds the building, the person who built the door, the person who made the gun that they used. You'd go, we solved bank robberies. You step on a button, the cops come. Or
right.
You open the bag of money and blue ink blows all over it. Or so you solve it this other way. And usually that's another thing in technology that's so cool. We stew over problems. And then the problem usually goes away for some reason. Like in 1900, the big problem in New York City was horse manure. Like, what are we going to do with all the horse manure? It's all over New York City. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And the answer wasn't better ways to dispose of horse manure. It was you've got cars.
Get cars,
we
right.
have another problem with mission. But it's like that in tech. We stew over these problems. Like take fishing. You probably would say fishing is right up at the top of everybody's list. How do I stop fishing? Well, I'll tell you how you stop fishing. When we stop doing email. And does it seem likely, if you've seen ChatGPT, does it seem like a stretch that you'd have, you each would have an email assistant that you trust that does your email for you? And it just lets you know, I did your email today. I handled everything as you would have. And there's 3 things I just need to go over with you, but I covered 200 emails today. We're good. I set up the meetings, responded nicely. I know how you would have responded if you need a summary. Why wouldn't you do that? When you do that, no more phishing.
Right.
But then it would be, how do I get malware in your intelligent mail assistant?
Right.
That's right. Yes.
That'll be the new industry.
That will be, yeah.
Well,
for sure.
It'll be data. It'll be an IEDR, intelligent assistant detection and response.
That's it. We got to coin that, Ed. It's going to be the future.
So that will come, and then you won't talk about phishing ever again. That'll be the way of like ping sweeps.
Okay.
So it's funny how that happens. It sloshes along. The things you worry about usually are not the things that come to get you. But I guarantee you that AI is a meaningful change, and it's going to be the great level.
It's a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
I agree.
Hey, I'd be remiss not to ask you this, Ed, because we have, Dave mentioned this to you before we pressed record that we do have a lot of interested cybersecurity, enthusiasts and people who want to pursue a career in cybersecurity. You're a professor with, at several schools. What advice do you give them? What do they need to focus on if it's one thing?
Well, breaking into any area from a career perspective nowadays is different than it used to be. Like when I would sit down with my dad, as I said earlier in our discussion, he recommended something and it lasted for 30 or 40 years for me. Mm-hmm. My advice usually to my students is that if they're starting out on their career, they should probably expect that they're going to change their career about 5-6 times in the next 30 years. So sometimes, how do I break into cybersecurity may not be exactly the right question to be asking, but rather, what are the skills that I need to be able to adapt and learn? I like technology. I like security. What should I do? And usually I tell them, get into a good organization. That's a good place to start. Like find, whether it's you're starting your own company or you go to a university, or you go to a company, or you go to a startup, it's usually a good idea to be around smart people. Mm-hmm. That would be number one. Like find a place where there are going to be some inspirational role models that you can learn from. Number two is start on a program, a lifelong program of learning, whether it's with your alma mater or some online thing, or even just YouTube. Like people go, hey, like they ask me, how do I learn machine learning? And then I usually don't like to answer because I'm a little embarrassed because I am a computer science. They go, what you doing? I go,
YouTube.
I took Stanford's machine learning course on YouTube. I really did. I took it and it was great. I mean, I was in the classroom we're doing now, watching it. I went through it twice and I feel like I sort of learned it. And you go, that's how you learned it? And I go, yeah. That sounds so dopey that you were learning it, but it was great. The lectures were great. And so I'm just saying a lifelong sort of habit around learning. And then third would be just establishing a very flexible attitude towards your career, recognizing that, you probably are going to be changing. You don't want to commit too much to one particular thing. This is who I am. This is what I do, because you could very quickly get disintermediate. So find a place where there's creative people, try and get a job there, commit to a lifelong program of learning, and then establish kind of a belief system of being flexible and being excited for change and seeing something new and saying, that's good. I'm going to embrace that, not being all freaked out. Like, everybody's freaked out about ChatGPT. Come on, man. Don't be freaked out about it. Let's rock and roll. Let's figure out how it makes you better. One's strong. People who are strong, like you're going down a river and you're strong and you see rapids. The ones who are strong aim for the rapids because they can jockey through it, come out on the other end, and the weaker boats, the big ones that can't make it, they stop and they never make it through the rapids. So if you aim for the rapids in your career, wow, you get ahead of everybody. But if you pull back and you're afraid and you complain that that's going to change things too much, others are going to go through and you're going to be left behind. So that's better than just, I want to break into cybersecurity. That's not usually the best way to manage your career.
Sounds like a book title. Aim for the rapids.
Maybe so, yeah. But I mean, the image makes.
I like it.
Oh, for sure.
Big chips can't make it through. That's how Apple basically took over computing from IBM. Right?
They did
do it. Apple could.
Yep.
Well, great life lessons. Ed, tell us really quickly. I know we're over the time limit, but what do you do at TAG, and how can people reach you if they need your service?
We're a research and advisory company. We basically hire practitioners who've had long careers and want to work for purpose, and kind of take on Gartner and Forrester, that kind of world. We disrupt them a little bit. The areas we work in, definitely cybersecurity, but we also focus on climate science. We have a team that does climate innovation. And then third, AI is a big one for us. Cool. Where we're starting to advise boards and others in that area. So we are experts. I mean, I could say that loosely because you're never really fully an expert at anything, but let's just say we've been doing these things a long time. And we try and bring that human sort of judgment through community to businesses who buy us as on a subscription basis as a research and advisory partner. It's been nice. We've been able to double the company every year, and I really expected that, but it's grown way faster than I would have expected. That was
right.
Well, we will certainly add his LinkedIn and his Tax Cyber's URL on our landing page, so make sure you look for it. Ed, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
What a phenomenal episode this was. We really appreciate it, and please come back.
Anytime.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back.
You bet. Nice to see you both.
All right. And thank you so much to our listeners for joining us. If you guys have feedback, questions for Ed, please reach us at podcast@highwirenetworks.com or leave a comment below. Be sure to join us for our next episode. Until next time, I'm Susanna Song.
And I'm Dave Barton.
And this is Cybersecurity Simplified. From all of us here at Overwatch by Highwire Networks, thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, rate the episodes you enjoyed, share, and leave us a comment. We'll catch you next time on the Cybersecurity Simplified podcast. Remember, the more you know about cybersecurity, the safer you'll be. To learn more, visit us at highwirenetworks.com/podcasts.